Tonight, we stand where earth ends, and the sky begins at a precipice where stone whispers secrets older than most nations, and clouds brush your face like a passing thought. The Dangrek Mountains stretch before you in jagged lines, their ridges catching the last embers of sunset, as if holding fire in their bones. Here, high above the Cambodian plains, the Preah Vihear Temple clings to the cliff like an ancient cat crouched on a ledge, both majestic and a little intimidating. You breathe in air that smells of grass, warmed by the day and cooled by night's approach, and you can almost hear the temple humming as if every stone retains the prayers of 1,000 years. Before we begin, if this little corner of calm has brought you any comfort, feel free to like the video and subscribe only if it feels genuine to you. No pressure. I'd also love to hear from you. Just drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always special to know we're all quietly gathered here from different corners of the world like a family, scattered but still connected. All right. Now go ahead and dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan or a soft hum in the background, something that feels like home. Nestle in, get cozy, and let's ease into tonight's story together. You step closer to the temple gates, your feet crunching over centuries of fallen leaves and broken sandstone chips, the kind that tell stories of time's slow nibbling. The first thing you notice is the sheer height. It's like someone decided that the gods would only listen if prayers were shouted from the sky. Preah Vihear's builders certainly weren't shy about ambition. This is no small shrine tucked in a valley. This is a monument that dares gravity itself, stretching along the cliff for nearly 800 meters, its causeways and staircases leading upward like an endless invitation to climb. And climb you do, feeling your calves complain, but your heart quietly thank you, because with every step the view grows wider, the air sharper, and the world below starts to look like a toy model. Historians still argue whether the temple's placement was purely religious or also political. After all, it's both a natural fortress and a celestial observatory, but either way they picked a spot that leaves you speechless. The earliest whispers of this temple's story trace back to the 9th century, during the reign of Yasovarman, the Khmer king with a thing for sacred mountains. The Khmers believed mountains were the homes of gods, and Preah Vihear, perched on its cliff, fit the bill like a divine Airbnb. At first there may have been only a modest shrine here, a wooden structure, perhaps nothing like the intricate stone marvel you see now, but the seeds of devotion were planted, and like stubborn vines they would grow. There's a legend, half history, half bedtime tale, that early hermits lived on this cliff, meditating so intensely that the gods themselves leaned in to listen. Whether that's true or just the kind of story grandmothers tell, under starlight it adds a romantic layer to the place. As you run your fingers over the weathered carvings of Nagas and dancing apsaras, you realize these stones have seen more sunrises than entire dynasties. The temple is dedicated to Shiva, the great god of destruction and rebirth, and you can sense why. The cliff itself feels like a metaphor for life, beautiful, dangerous, always on the edge of something new. Inscriptions discovered here, some so faded they look like whispers on rock, speak of kings who built, rebuilt and rededicated the temple over centuries, layering their piety like coats of paint. One quirky tidbit. Some carvings include celestial dancers with hairstyles that would make modern influencers jealous, towering buns and intricate braids that scream, "Yes, I spent 3 hours on this and I'm fabulous." But the temple is not frozen in the past. It's alive with questions. Scholars still debate who precisely started the first construction. Was it Yasovarman or an even earlier king whose name time swallowed? And why here, in this remote spot, rather than near the bustling heart of Angkor? Some say it was meant to guard the frontier, others that it was simply closer to the gods. You shrug, because maybe the answer is both, or maybe it's lost in the same mists that curl along the cliff at dawn. The night deepens, stars prick the sky, and you stand still, the wind tugging at your clothes. You think about how many feet have stood where you stand, priests chanting hymns, kings making offerings, soldiers sharpening swords, pilgrims gasping for breath. Each left something invisible behind, and tonight so do you. The temple doesn't care who you are. It just holds your presence for a heartbeat, then lets it drift into history. Somewhere, an owl hoots, probably mocking your awe, but you smile, because awe is exactly what this place demands and gives back in spades. As you take one last look at the silhouetted towers, you feel a curious calm. The temple has waited over 1,000 years, and it can wait a little longer for the rest of its story to be told. You turn ready to climb further into its secrets, because the night is young and so is your curiosity. You move upward along the ancient stairways, your steps echoing softly against the stone, as if the temple itself acknowledges your presence. The air grows thinner, not from altitude, but from a sense of closeness to something sacred. Tonight the moon spills silver across the sandstone, and under its light the outlines of the earliest shrines seem to shimmer as if they are half in this world, half in another. You imagine the 9th century when these first sanctuaries rose from the bare rock wooden frames and simple brick structures dedicated to Shiva. It's hard not to admire the devotion of those early builders. No cranes, no trucks, just human hands, chisels, and a belief so strong it could bend stone to its will. You picture King Yasovarman, I sometimes called the founder of sacred mountains in Khmer culture, standing here surveying the horizon. He wasn't just building a shrine, he was anchoring heaven to earth. The Khmer belief in Mount Meru, the cosmic mountain where gods dwell, shaped everything about this place. Preah Vihear wasn't random. It was a deliberate attempt to recreate a slice of the cosmos, a stairway to the divine. The temple's alignment, its long causeway, pointing like an arrow to the east, mirrors celestial order. Historians still argue whether astronomical calculations guided its construction, or if it was simply positioned to impress any mortal who dared approach. Either way, the effect is stunning even a millennium later. As dawn breaks in your mind's eye, you see artisans carving sandstone blocks, each one dragged from quarries miles away. Some weigh tons, yet they were hauled up this mountain with nothing more than ropes, ramps, and determination that probably involved more than a few sawbacks. You smile, imagining one worker grumbling, "This better get me some serious karma." The carvings that survive show a mixture of styles. Early ones, simple and almost shy. Later ones, exploding with detail, floral motifs, mythic battles, and the serene faces of deities who have weathered storms and still smile knowingly. One quirky detail that lingers in the temple's early phases is the presence of linga stone pillars representing Shiva's creative energy. They're everywhere, tucked in sanctuaries, courtyards, even corners where you least expect them. To the modern eye, they might seem abstract, but to the Khmers, they were powerful, sacred objects that tied human life to divine creation. Imagine priests pouring water or milk over these lingas, the liquid flowing down like blessings spreading across the land. You almost hear the rhythmic chanting, the smell of burning sandalwood rising into the cool air. The earliest shrines were likely modest, rebuilt many times as kings added their marks. Some inscriptions suggest that offerings included not just gold and flowers, but also food, livestock, and perhaps the occasional dramatic ceremony involving fire, because nothing says holy like a bit of pyrotechnics. The temple at this stage was not yet the sprawling complex you'll later see, but it had something powerful intention. It was a beacon calling out to both gods and men, saying this is where earth meets sky. Walking through these ancient spaces, you can't help but notice how the design itself tells a story. The staircases rise in steep sections, almost like tests of devotion. You have to sweat a little to earn your view. The sanctuaries aligned one after another lead you ever higher, a physical journey mirroring a spiritual climb. The Khmer architects weren't just builders, they were storytellers in stone. They understood that a sacred space isn't just a destination, it's an experience. You feel that with every step, as the temple seems to guide you towards something you can't quite name. But this early history isn't without its mysteries. Historians still debate the exact dates of the first construction phases. Some argue the temple predates Yasovarman by decades, perhaps even a century, suggesting an earlier king or local ruler began the project. Others think the site may have been sacred long before the Khmers arrived, a place where older animist traditions mingled with Hindu ideas. The lack of clear records leaves room for speculation, and you find yourself enjoying the uncertainty after all. A little mystery makes a bedtime story so much richer. The sun of memory climbs higher, lighting up bas-reliefs of gods riding their celestial vehicles, some fierce, some serene. You notice Indra on his elephant, Vishnu on his eagle, and Shiva with his trident, all frozen mid-motion, yet somehow alive. The temple whispers of an age when kings saw themselves as protectors of cosmic order, their rule sanctioned by gods whose images looked down from the walls. In those days, religion and politics weren't separate, they were threads in the same tapestry, and Preah Vihear was a dazzling knot in that weave. You pause at one carving where a goddess seems to dance her hands frozen in a graceful arc. The detail is so delicate it's almost absurd considering this was carved with primitive tools. Maybe the artist had a muse or just a really good day, but the result is mesmerizing. You think about how many centuries of rain, wind and sun have tried to erase her, yet she still dances. That resilience feels like the temple's secret heartbeat. As night reclaims the scene, you linger among the earliest sanctuaries, feeling how the place has grown, not just in stone, but in spirit. From these humble beginnings, Preah Vihear would expand, evolve and endure, shaped by kings' wars and time itself. For now you rest your hand on the cool sandstone, as if to say, I see you. The temple, in its quiet way, seems to say back, and I remember. You keep climbing, feeling the stairways stretch like a ribbon toward the sky, and with each step, you sense the centuries layering around you. By the 11th and 12th centuries, the humble shrines you first encountered have begun to transform, blossoming into something grander under the command of kings, with ambitions as towering as the cliff itself. This is the age of the Khmer Empire at its boldest, a time when rulers like Suryavarman I and later Suryavarman II weren't content with mere offerings. They wanted monuments that screamed power to both gods and mortals. You can almost see them now standing on this very cliff, robes fluttering in the wind, pointing dramatically at the horizon, while architects scrambled to capture their vision in stone. The temple's expansion under these kings was nothing short of breathtaking. Under Suryavarman, the structure stretched its arms wider, staircases grew longer, and the central sanctuary rose like a crown. When Suryavarman II came along, the same king who gave the world Angkor, Wat Preah Vihear was elevated to a masterpiece that rivaled even his other creations. Historians still argue whether the temple was ever meant to challenge Angkor's supremacy, or if it was simply another jewel in the empire's crown. Either way, it glowed like a beacon in both faith and politics, perched on a cliff that made any invader think twice before trying their luck. You wander through the galleries that date from this golden era, and the carvings here are different, bolder, more confident, as if the artisans knew they were working on something that would outlast them. Walls bloom with scenes from the Ramayana and Mahabharata, gods locked in epic battles, demons tumbling under the weight of divine weapons, and celestial dancers twirling forever in mid-air. The level of detail is absurd. You lean closer and notice patterns so fine they could be jewelry spirals that make your head spin. A quirky little figure of Hanuman, the monkey god, crouches in a corner, his tail curling with impossible elegance, as if the sculptor decided to have a bit of fun showing off. The temple's plan itself became a kind of architectural poem. Instead of the traditional square layout, Preah Vihear stretches in a long north-south axis, following the natural ridge of the mountain. Each level rises higher, with stairways connecting a series of courtyards and sanctuaries that lead to the main sanctuary at the top. It's like climbing through a cosmic ladder, each step taking you closer to Shiva's celestial abode. This linear design, unique among Khmer temples, still puzzles experts. Was it simply adapted to the cliff's shape, or did it carry symbolic meaning about the journey to enlightenment? Historians still debate, and you, caught in the glow of torchlight against carvings, simply marvel at how it all flows together. The rituals during this era must have been a sight to behold. Pilgrims would ascend the causeways carrying offerings, while priests in white robes lit oil lamps that flickered against the walls. The smell of incense would mix with the mountain air, and chants would echo from stone to sky, creating a soundscape both haunting and uplifting. You imagine standing among them, your footsteps blending with theirs, your breath carrying a whispered prayer into the void. Somewhere, a bell would ring, not loud, but persistent, marking the rhythm of devotion. And perhaps a cheeky monkey or two would steal fruit offerings when no one was looking, because even in sacred spaces, mischief finds a way. As you reach the upper levels, you see how the temple's decorative richness also served as propaganda. The kings carved their names into inscriptions boasting of their piety and power, like ancient press releases etched in stone. One inscription even hints that Suryavarman II offered gold and elephants to ensure the god's favor, which makes you chuckle. Apparently divine beings have expensive tastes. But beyond the ego, there's a genuine sense of reverence here. These rulers truly believed they were building bridges between the earthly and the divine, and they poured everything into that belief. Even now, centuries later, you feel the energy of that ambition. The temple seems to hum under your fingertips, its stones warm with the memory of fires lit long ago. And yet, for all its glory, Preah Vihear wasn't immune to the winds of change. You can sense that this golden age was fragile, like the edge of the cliff it sits on. The Khmer Empire's strength would waver, and with it, the temple's fate would begin to shift. But for this moment, standing among towers that pierced the sky, you let yourself bask in its triumph. Night deepens, stars spill across the heavens like spilled rice, and the temple's silhouette sharpens against the sky. The wind brushes your face, carrying the faint scent of old incense and mountain herbs. You take a deep breath, feeling both small and infinite, like a single note in a vast song. The temple holds you in its gaze, and you swear you hear it. Whisper, "Remember this. Remember me." You continue along the rising causeways where each worn stone step feels like a memory pressing under your feet, and soon you find yourself among the hum of an age when pilgrims and priests made this temple a living heartbeat of the mountains. The wind softens, carrying the faint ghost of incense, and you imagine the 12th and 13th centuries when Preah Vihear wasn't just a relic of kings, but a breathing sanctuary of faith. Back then, this was no quiet ruin, it thrummed with life. You picture lines of pilgrims dusty from days of travel, winding up the steep staircases, clutching offerings of flowers, rice, and small coins, each step a prayer whispered to Shiva, to the gods, to the endless sky above. The approach itself was designed to be transformative. By the time you reached the summit, sweat slick on your back, the world below seemed to vanish, replaced by clouds and sacred chants. You hear those chants now, deep and melodic voices rising with the wind echoing against the cliff walls. The priests, clad in white cotton, move like calm rivers through the courtyards, tending to the lingers, lighting oil lamps, and reciting verses that roll through the air like distant thunder. Historians still argue whether these priests were mostly Brahmins from India or local Khmer, sages blending Hinduism with native animism, but you sense both influences braided together like vines on stone. In your mind's eye, you walk among the pilgrims. Some carry garlands of jasmine, others small clay lamps, while children tug at their mothers' sleeves, wide-eyed at the towering carvings of gods and demons. Merchants linger at the lower steps, selling fruits, fabrics, and trinkets, because faith, as always, attracts business. You smile at the thought of someone haggling for the best price on an offering bowl just minutes before dedicating it to the gods. The temple was not only a place of worship, but a community hub where stories were exchanged as freely as prayers. The daily rituals must have been mesmerizing. You see priests pouring water and milk over the sacred lingers, the liquid cascading down like miniature waterfalls catching the glow of firelight. The fragrance of sandalwood and flowers hangs heavy in the air, mingling with the mountain breeze. You almost sneeze as a cloud of incense smoke swirls around you. Spirituality apparently comes with side effects. Quirky detail. Some records suggest that during certain festivals, devotees released small floating lamps from the cliff edge, letting them drift in the wind like fireflies. Imagine a night sky, not just dotted with stars, but sprinkled with tiny flames dancing over the abyss. Beautiful, and perhaps a little nerve-wracking for anyone afraid of heights. You pause at a doorway, framed with intricate carvings. The apsaras here, those celestial dancers, seem to shimmer hips, swaying eternally, fingers curved in delicate gestures. They remind you that this was not just a site of solemnity, but also of celebration. Music likely filled the courtyards during festivals, drums, thumping flutes, singing dancers, swirling in colorful silk. The temple was alive with art, sound, and motion, a stage for human joy as much as divine reverence. And yet life here wasn't without its challenges. The climb was treacherous and the mountain could be unforgiving. Pilgrims sometimes collapsed from exhaustion or weather, and legends speak of spirits testing the faith of those who dared ascend. One tale, still told by locals, warns of a serpent spirit that guarded the path, slithering unseen, blessing the pure-hearted and tripping up the arrogant. Whether myth or metaphor, it adds a shiver to your spine as you climb higher. The temple's role as a pilgrimage site also made it a crossroads of cultures. Traders, travelers, and wandering monks brought stories from distant lands, India, China, and beyond. They left behind small tokens, some of which archaeologists have found: pottery shards from far-off markets, beads of foreign glass, even coins stamped with unfamiliar kings. These little traces remind you that Preah Vihear was part of a wider world, not an isolated mountain top. It absorbed influences yet remained uniquely itself, perched proudly on the edge of heaven. As you wander through what would have been the central sanctuary, you try to imagine the moment a pilgrim's prayer met the dawn. The sun would rise over the plains, bathing the temple in golden light, the statues glowing as if alive. That moment must have felt like touching the divine, brief, fragile, and unforgettable. The priests likely performed sunrise rituals here, ringing bells as the sky blushed with color, a daily conversation between Earth and the cosmos. Still, even in its vibrant prime, the temple was already accumulating the first layers of time's slow decay. Stones cracked, moss crept into carvings, and some structures leaned like tired old men. Yet the faith remained unshaken, carried in the footsteps of those who believed the climb was worth every ache. The temple stood not as a perfect monument, but as a living one, growing and aging with the people who loved it. Night falls again, and you sit on the upper terrace, imagining the priests extinguishing their lamps, the pilgrims settling to sleep under the stars, and the gods, those silent stone watchers, smiling faintly in the moonlight. The temple, alive with devotion, breathes around you. Its heart still beats in the wind that brushes your cheek, whispering, "Climb higher." There's more to see. You rise at dawn and keep climbing, the first light catching on the edges of carved lintels, painting them in soft gold as if the gods themselves are stroking the temple awake. But now, as you step into the centuries that followed the chants you heard earlier, fade replaced by a hush, heavy with change. The Khmer Empire, once so mighty and expansive, begins to falter. The 13th and 14th centuries bring cracks not just in stone, but in the empire's very foundation, wars, shifting alliances, and the slow retreat of its borders. You feel the tension in the air, as if the temple itself is holding its breath. Political turmoil sweeps across the region, and Preah Vihear is not immune. You see rival kingdoms pressing at the edges, Ayutthaya rising to the west, Champa striking from the east, while internal strife gnaws at the empire's core. The once grand processions of pilgrims thin out, replaced by smaller, more cautious gatherings. The priests continue their rituals, stubborn in their devotion, but resources grow scarce and repairs slow. Historians still argue whether Preah Vihear fell into decline gradually like a candle burning low, or whether it faced moments of sudden abandonment due to conflict or famine. Either way, the temple's voice grows quieter during this age. You walk through the galleries and see where moss begins to creep over carvings, blurring the edges of once sharp apsaras. Vines snake into cracks, roots dig into stairs, and birds nest in forgotten corners. Nature, patient as ever, starts reclaiming the spaces left unattended. You crouch and run your fingers along a section where lichen paints the stone in delicate green, proof that time is the greatest artist of all. And yet the temple doesn't give up. It endures, holding on to its dignity even as it weathers neglect. A quirky tidbit from these centuries is that local folklore begins to wrap around the temple like mist. With fewer official inscriptions being made, stories grow from whispers, tales of ghosts haunting the stairs of a white elephant that appeared on moonless nights, of a hermit who could turn invisible and guard the sacred lingers from thieves. Whether these stories were born out of fear or fascination, they kept the temple alive in the minds of those who still lived in its shadow. You can almost see small groups of villagers coming up to light incense, even when the empire's power has long drifted away. They offer rice flowers, perhaps even a chicken or two, because faith doesn't vanish with politics. Somewhere along the cliff, a solitary figure, maybe a wandering monk, meditates, the wind playing with his robes. The temple shifts from being a royal jewel to a quiet local shrine, humble but persistent. The neighboring powers notice this weakening. Siamese influence creeps in during the late medieval period as Ayutthaya and later other Thai polities expand their reach. The temple's position on the border makes it a prize both strategic and symbolic. You imagine soldiers marching the same causeways where pilgrims once walked their armor, clanking their presence, unsettling the silence. Preah Vihear stands as a silent witness to these shifting tides, its stones absorbing the footfalls of conquerors as easily as those of devotees. Through the centuries, storms both literal and political sweep across the mountain. You picture a monsoon pounding the temple, rain cascading off the roof tiles like waterfalls, lightning clawing at the sky. Inside, perhaps only a handful of priests huddled by flickering lamps, reciting prayers against both thunder and history's darker tempests. The temple survives the storm, but each one leaves its mark. Historians still debate the exact extent of destruction or neglect during these centuries. Was the temple ever fully abandoned, or did it always have someone to care for it, however modestly? The evidence is scattered like the fallen stones. You step over each one, a clue, but never the whole picture. Some scholars argue that even in decline, Preah Vihear retained spiritual importance. Others believe it became little more than a ruin visited by the curious and the desperate. As you stand here, you feel the answer lies somewhere in between, half shrine, half ghost. Night approaches and the wind rises, rustling the leaves in the surrounding forest. You hear the distant call of an owl and maybe, just maybe, the faintest echo of ancient chants carried on the air. You sit on a crumbling step, watching the stars emerge, and you realize that even in its quietest centuries, the temple never truly fell silent. It kept its vigil, waiting patiently for whatever history would throw at it next. The jungle edges closer roots, tightening their grip, but the temple holds fast. You touch a stone warmed by the fading sun and think, you've been through worse, haven't you? And it has. Because Preah Vihear, even in decline, remains a cliffside survivor, enduring the storm of centuries with a quiet strength that humbles you. The path bends upward again, and with each step, the shadows lengthen, as if history itself grows taller and more complex. The centuries have rolled forward, and now you find yourself in the era when Siamese kings set their eyes on this precarious jewel. The Khmer Empire by this time is a memory scattered across the plains, while Ayutthaya and later the Kingdom of Siam rise with ambition. Preah Vihear, perched on its cliff like a sentinel, becomes a tempting symbol of control. You feel the tension building in the stones underfoot, as if they remember every footstep of soldiers who climbed here not to pray, but to claim. You imagine the late 18th and 19th centuries, when Siam expanded its reach over much of what was once Khmer territory. Armies crossed borders, sometimes with treaties, often with swords, and Preah Vihear changed hands like a prized relic in a game of power. Historians still argue over the exact timing of Siam's firm control. Some suggest it began earlier with the decline of Angkor, while others place it firmly in the 19th century during the turbulence of regional wars. What's clear is that the temple's identity shifted during this era, reflecting not just Khmer devotion, but also Thai kingship. Standing on the upper terrace, you picture banners of Siam fluttering in the mountain wind, soldiers standing watch over the narrow ridges, and perhaps a royal envoy arriving to offer gifts at the sanctuary. The temple was still sacred even under new rulers. Thai kings recognized its spiritual power and maintained rituals here, blending their own traditions with those they inherited. Yet for the Khmer people, each wave of Siamese influence felt like a chapter written in someone else's script, their own voice slowly fading into footnotes. A quirky tidbit from this time. Some accounts say elephants were used to transport supplies up the steep approach, and that one particularly stubborn elephant refused to climb the final stairway. Local guides still joke about this, claiming the ghost of that elephant lingers, nudging visitors who hesitate at the last steps. You glance behind you, no elephant, just the wind, but you smile anyway at the thought. The temple, now under Siamese influence, was not just a place of prayer, but a border outpost. Its location high on the Dangrek Mountains made it a perfect lookout over the plains below. Soldiers stationed here could see for miles, and on clear days even catch glimpses of distant villages shimmering like mirages. You can almost hear the clink of weapons, the murmur of guards, and the occasional bored whistle of someone who'd rather be anywhere else than on a chilly mountain top. Still, even as a military post, Preah Vihear retained its mystique. Thai rulers didn't strip it of its sacredness, they embraced it. Offerings continued, though the style of worship blended Thai customs with older Khmer practices. Monks from the Thai side of the border came to meditate here, their saffron robes glowing like small fires against the grey stone. The temple's carvings, weathered but proud, witnessed it all without judgment, as if saying, "I have seen many kings, and I will see many more." The 19th century brought even more complexity. European colonial powers began sniffing around Southeast Asia, reshaping borders with lines on maps rather than swords. The French established control over Cambodia, while Siam negotiated its independence with diplomacy and strategic concessions. Preah Vihear, sitting inconveniently near the new boundary, became a pawn in these colonial games. You can almost hear the scratch of pens on paper as officials in faraway offices decide the temple's fate, oblivious to the way the mountain wind feels against the skin here. During this time, Siamese forces still held the temple, but its status grew murky. Was it Thai? Was it Khmer? The cliff didn't care, but the people certainly did. Local Khmer villagers still saw it as their own sacred site, while Siam fortified its presence. You imagine a French surveyor huffing up the steep stairs with a notebook in hand, perhaps muttering under his breath about why borders couldn't just follow rivers instead of cliffs. Historians still debate how deeply Siam integrated the temple into its own cultural identity during these years. Some argue it was cherished primarily for its strategic location, while others believe it became part of Siamese spiritual geography, honored as a remote but meaningful shrine. Whatever the case, it remained in use, its sanctity never entirely lost, even amidst shifting politics. As twilight deepens, you stand at the edge of the cliff and look out. The view stretches endlessly, the plains fading into mist. You realize this is exactly why rulers fought for it. Whoever controls Preah Vihear holds the high ground, both literally and symbolically. The temple seems to sense your thoughts and offers no answer, only the sound of the wind weaving through its towers. The night settles in, bringing a hush that feels almost like suspense, as if the temple knows what's coming next. You step back into its shadow, feeling the weight of centuries of contested claims pressing around you. For now, under Siamese banners, it waits quietly, its stones storing every secret, every oath, every betrayal. The stars glimmer above, watching like ancient witnesses, and you know this story is far from over. You climb again, but this time the ground feels unsettled, as if history itself is about to redraw its lines beneath your feet. The 20th century dawns, and with it comes the age of maps, treaties, and courtroom battles, fought not with swords, but with pens and documents. Preah Vihear, clinging to its cliff as always, becomes the center of a tug-of-war between Thailand and the newly French-colonized Cambodia. You can almost hear the scratching of cartographers' quills and the clicking of typewriters as colonial powers decide the fates of places they barely understand. The French, having taken Cambodia under their wing, well more like under their boot, begin surveying the region with obsessive precision. The 1904 treaty between Siam and France tries to fix the border using the Dangrek Mountains as the dividing line. Seems simple, right? Mountains make neat borders, except here where the temple sits on a cliff that juts out awkwardly. The maps drawn afterward by French surveyors in 1907 conveniently place Preah Vihear on the Cambodian side. Historians still argue whether this was a mistake, a sly move, or just geography's cruel joke. Thailand at the time didn't protest loudly, perhaps because the surveyors' decisions weren't immediately obvious, or because colonial politics made protests risky. You stand on the temple terrace and picture French officials sipping coffee back in Phnom Penh, while Siamese authorities grumble from afar. The temple itself, timeless as ever, watches humans argue over its address like a tired landlord. Over the following decades, France invests in restoring parts of the temple, clearing jungle, stabilizing walls, and documenting its beauty. Ironically, colonial powers who took so much from the region also helped preserve some of its treasures. You almost roll your eyes at the irony, but you're also grateful the carvings you touch now weren't lost completely to time. A quirky detail: during the 1930s, French scholars took photographs of Preah Vihear that later became famous in art and archaeology circles. In some of those photos, you can spot local children peeking from behind pillars, giggling at the strangers with bulky cameras. Those kids, likely unaware of borders or treaties, remind you that while nations bicker, life in the shadow of the temple simply goes on. Then the Second World War hits and Southeast Asia shakes. The Japanese sweep through and control of the region flips again. The temple doesn't see major battles, but soldiers do climb its steps and flags change more than once. Thailand, under Japanese influence, reclaims territories including Preah Vihear. The mountain winds carry the smell of gun oil and the rustle of uniforms instead of incense. For a brief moment, it feels as if the temple is once again a strategic outpost rather than a sacred sanctuary. When the war ends and Cambodia moves toward independence, the question of ownership resurfaces with renewed intensity. Thailand maintains that the temple lies within its borders. Cambodia insists it's theirs, citing the 1907 French map. The dispute smolders quietly until it bursts into legal flames in the 1950s. You picture lawyers in crisp suits replacing soldiers and the sound of artillery replaced by the shuffle of legal documents. The case eventually lands before the International Court of Justice in The Hague, a courtroom thousands of miles away, where judges pore over old maps while probably wishing they could visit the site themselves. In 1962, the court delivers its verdict: Preah Vihear belongs to Cambodia. The judges rule that Thailand had accepted the French map for decades and therefore must honor it. Cambodia celebrates, raising its flag over the temple. Thailand, stung, withdraws its troops but not its claims. Historians still argue about the fairness of the ruling. Some say it was a just decision based on evidence. Others call it colonial-era trickery enshrined in law. You stand here and feel how the temple, so far removed from courtrooms, simply endures the verdict with ancient patience. After the ruling, Cambodian monks return to the temple, resuming rituals long interrupted. You imagine saffron robes fluttering again, prayers rising into the mountain air, as if the temple itself exhales after decades of tension. But the peace doesn't last. Political turmoil in Cambodia, first the rise of the Khmer Rouge, then years of civil war, casts a shadow over Preah Vihear once more. The temple becomes isolated at times, inaccessible, a sacred site caught in the crossfire of ideologies and gunfire. The jungle creeps back during these years of neglect, roots prying at the stones, birds nesting undisturbed in the towers. Yet even through war bombs and abandonment, the temple stands. You run your hand along a crack in the wall and think of it as a scar, proof that survival isn't always clean, but it is always powerful. As night falls, you imagine the lights of border outposts flickering in the distance, the temple caught between two nations, neither willing to let go. The stars spread overhead, cold and distant, as if to remind you that borders are a human invention, while this mountain and its temple have existed long before such lines were drawn. You take one last look over the cliff's edge where darkness swallows the plains, and you feel the temple's silent endurance. It has outlived kings, empires, colonial surveyors, and courtroom verdicts. The wind whispers through its corridors, carrying a promise that it will endure whatever comes next. The story, however, is not finished. History still has battles to wage here. You climb once more into the shadow of history, and this time the air grows heavier, filled with the echoes of boots, the smell of gunpowder, and the sharp crack of rifles. The late 20th century was no quiet lull for Preah Vihear. After decades of legal battles, wars, and shifting control, the temple now found itself perched not only on a cliff, but also on the razor edge of modern conflict. The Cold War's tremors reached even this remote mountain, and the sacred site became a military outpost caught in the storms of Cambodian and Thai politics. The 1970s hit Cambodia like a hammer. The Khmer Rouge rose to power, dragging the country into a nightmare of genocide and destruction. In the chaos, Preah Vihear was abandoned once again, its sacred halls falling silent, except for the wind and the occasional rustle of animals reclaiming the steps. You walk through those empty corridors in your mind, imagining how vines tightened their gripstones, cracked under rain, and the once proud carvings stared out with a kind of stoic sadness. Somewhere a lone figure, maybe a villager, maybe a soldier, might have wandered these halls, but no chants, no festivals, no prayers filled the air. Then came the Vietnamese invasion of Cambodia in 1979, toppling the Khmer Rouge, but plunging the region into further turmoil. Preah Vihear, sitting so close to the border, became a point of military interest once again. You can almost hear the boots of Vietnamese and Cambodian soldiers echoing on the ancient stairways, their presence a stark contrast to the monks who once walked here. The temple, built for devotion, now bore the weight of rifles and sandbags. Thailand, wary of conflict spilling over its borders, fortified its side. Skirmishes erupted near the temple, with artillery fire occasionally reaching its ancient stones. You crouch in the memory of those battles, the air thick with smoke, the sandstone trembling under impacts. Soldiers huddled behind its walls, not to admire carvings, but to seek cover. Quirky detail, some soldiers reportedly etched their own graffiti on hidden sections of the temple, modern names and dates scrawled beside millennia, old Sanskrit inscriptions as if history needed another reminder that humans can't resist leaving their mark. The 1980s and 1990s saw intermittent fighting in the area, even as Cambodia began to stabilize. Preah Vihear was declared a demilitarized zone at times, but agreements were often shaky, and soldiers stayed close. Historians still debate the extent of the damage during these decades. Some say artillery scarred parts of the temple. Others insist it escaped with only minor wounds. Standing here, you see patched sections where repairs blend with original stone, a quiet testimony to survival. In 1998, the last remnants of the Khmer Rouge surrendered, finally bringing a fragile peace to the region. Cambodia regained control of the temple, but tensions with Thailand remained. The cliffs here had become more than a geographic border. They were a political fault line. You imagine Thai and Cambodian soldiers staring at each other across the ridge, neither willing to back down, both claiming they were standing on rightful ground. By the early 2000s, the temple was accessible again to pilgrims and tourists, but the calm was deceptive. When Cambodia applied to UNESCO to have Preah Vihear recognized as a World Heritage Site, Thailand objected, fearing that such recognition would strengthen Cambodia's claim over disputed surrounding land. You can almost hear the arguments in meeting rooms, papers, shuffling voices rising as if the temple's stones were pieces on a chessboard. In 2008, UNESCO granted the status to Cambodia, sparking nationalist protests in Thailand and a new wave of armed clashes. You walk through the temple during those tense years, stepping over bullet casings glinting in the grass. Artillery again thundered in 2008, 2009 and 2011 with exchanges leaving parts of the surrounding area scarred and some sections of the temple chipped. The roar of explosions mixed with the cries of monks trying to protect their shrine, a surreal collision of ancient peace and modern war. Through it all, Preah Vihear stood stone's cracked walls, scarred, but still upright, still watching. One particularly eerie episode during a ceasefire lull, both Thai and Cambodian soldiers reportedly prayed at the same shrine within the temple, laying down their weapons briefly to ask the gods for protection. The idea of enemies kneeling side by side under the same roof, even for a moment, is strangely comforting. Perhaps the temple whispered to them too, reminding them that it had seen countless wars and still endured. As you stand on the upper sanctuary tonight, the wind brushes your face with the scent of smoke long gone. You can almost hear distant gunfire echoing across time, followed by an even older sound, the soft ringing of temple bells as if the stones themselves are trying to soothe the mountain. The night sky spreads wide above, indifferent to the borders humans draw, and you feel a quiet hope rising. If the temple can survive centuries of conflict, maybe reconciliation isn't impossible. The mountain falls silent again, leaving only the whisper of the wind and the rustle of leaves. Preah Vihear, scarred, yet standing, reminds you that strength isn't about never falling. It's about standing back up over and over until the stars themselves fade. Tomorrow its story continues, and so does yours. You step forward into the dawn of a new century, and for once the mountain air feels lighter, as if Preah Vihear itself breathes a sigh of relief. The guns have quieted at least for now, and the world begins to see the temple not as a battlefield, but as a treasure worth protecting. The 2010s bring a turning point, a moment where global recognition wraps the ancient stones like a protective cloak. The United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, steps in, declaring Preah Vihear a World Heritage Site in 2008, a crown of protection meant to celebrate its cultural and historical significance. You can almost see the blue UNESCO emblem fluttering against the sky, a modern banner in place of the war flags that once claimed this cliff. With the designation came celebrations in Cambodia. The temple, long a symbol of endurance, became a source of national pride. Monks chanted blessings as the Cambodian flag fluttered over the sanctuary, and locals climbed the long staircases with offerings, their prayers now mingling with the voices of international visitors. For many Cambodians, Preah Vihear stood not just as an old temple, but as a testament to identity, proof that their culture had survived centuries of conquest, colonization, and conflict. You can almost feel that pride in the stones themselves, warmed by the morning sun. Yet recognition brought its own kind of storm. Thailand objected to the UNESCO listing, fearing it would strengthen Cambodia's claim to the disputed borderlands surrounding the temple. Protests erupted, politicians fumed, and the cliffs once again felt the tremors of conflict. Between 2008 and 2011, exchanges of gunfire rattled the area, with artillery shells landing dangerously close to the temple. You imagine monks clutching their robes as explosions cracked nearby, praying that the ancient sanctuary would not be shattered. Historians still argue about how much damage was done during these skirmishes. Some say only minor scars, others insist fragments of history were lost forever. Despite the tensions, the temple remained resilient. International media covered the disputes, showing the world a breathtaking monument under threat. Suddenly, millions of eyes were watching, and the global spotlight added pressure for peace. The International Court of Justice was called upon again, and in 2013 it reaffirmed Cambodia's sovereignty over the temple. Thailand grumbled, but eventually complied, pulling back troops and cooling tempers. The temple, like an old wise teacher, seemed to whisper to both nations, "Enough fighting, I've seen enough." Tourism returned cautiously, and with it efforts to restore and preserve the temple's delicate carvings. Conservationists from Cambodia and abroad worked side by side, cleaning moss, stabilizing cracked walls, and ensuring that the temple's beauty would not be lost to time or conflict. You watch them in your mind's eye, gently brushing centuries of dust from a carving of Shiva, as if waking the god from a long sleep. Quirky tidbit. Some restoration workers swore they felt watched by the apsaras, claiming the carving's eyes seemed to follow them as they worked. Maybe it was just fatigue, or maybe the temple was checking to see if they were doing a good job. With peace slowly settling, Preah Vihear began to shine again as a place of pilgrimage and tourism. Pilgrims climbed the steep stairways not under the shadow of rifles, but under the warmth of sunrise. Tourists gasped at the cliff's edge, snapping photos where ancient kings once gazed at the horizon. You hear laughter now, footsteps on the stone, the click of cameras mingling with the rustle of robes as monks chant softly in the background. The temple, once scarred by wars, now welcomes voices of curiosity instead of fear. Historians still debate the deeper meaning of UNESCO recognition. Was it purely about preserving heritage, or also about asserting political claims? Does the world truly understand the significance of this place, or is it just another line on a traveler's bucket list? You shrug as the wind brushes your hair because the temple itself doesn't care about debates. It stands as it always has, looking out over the plains, watching clouds drift lazily across the border, as if borders don't exist at all. Now, as evening paints the sky in purples and golds, you stand at the sanctuary's highest point, the drop below dizzying and the horizon endless. The cliff catches the wind and sends it swirling around you, carrying scents of earth flowers and the faint trace of incense left by the day's last pilgrim. The temple glows in the fading light, its stones almost warm under your hand, and you feel as if it's alive, breathing, remembering, forgiving. Tonight, the stars return sharp and clear, and the silence is no longer heavy but serene. You realize that the temple has become something more than a monument. It's a bridge across centuries, connecting kings to villagers, soldiers to monks, and now you, a traveler, listening to its story. Preah Vihear has seen empires rise and fall, borders drawn and redrawn, battles fought and treaties signed. Yet here it stands steady as the mountain, fragile yet unbroken. The night deepens and the temple whispers its final secrets to the wind, secrets only the stars understand. You listen heart quiet, knowing that this chapter of its story ends not with conflict but with peace, however fragile, however temporary. The temple, after all, has time. It always has. You take the last steps to the very edge of the cliff where the sky swallows the horizon and the earth seems to fall away beneath your feet. The air is cool and thin, laced with the smell of damp stone and wild herbs. Behind you, the temple stretches in silent majesty, its towers and galleries rising like the bones of the mountain itself. In this moment it feels as if the centuries have folded into one, and you can sense every king, pilgrim, soldier, and traveler who ever stood here, breathing the same air, staring into the same endless distance. The wars have quieted, the flags have stopped changing, and for now, the temple rests. Cambodia guards it with pride, while Thailand, though still watchful, shares in the awe of its beauty. The disputes, though not fully erased, have softened into conversations rather than gunfire. You can almost hear the voices of diplomats, archaeologists, and monks blending together like the murmur of a river, sometimes agreeing, sometimes not, but always returning to the fact that this place is bigger than politics. Historians still argue whether Preah Vihear should be remembered as a Cambodian jewel, a shared Southeast Asian heritage, or a monument above borders altogether. Perhaps it's all three, and perhaps that's the point. You wander slowly along the upper terrace where the carvings catch the fading light. The apsaras dance eternally, their stone fingers delicate, their faces serene. Shiva's linga still stands in the sanctuary, worn smooth by centuries of offerings. You run your hand over the cool stone and feel the faint hum of devotion lingering there, as if prayers never quite leave, they just echo softly forever. In the corner, a small shrine flickers with candles left by today's visitors, their flames trembling in the breeze, but refusing to go out, a quiet metaphor for the temple's own resilience. The mountain around you is alive with sound. Crickets chirp in the grass, Night birds call across the valley, and the wind sings low through the corridors like the temple itself is humming to the stars. You think back to the earliest hermits who meditated here, to the kings who built stairways into the clouds, to the soldiers who once crouched where you stand, and to the tourists now climbing the same path with cameras and awe in their eyes. Preah Vihear has held them all without judgment, without preference. It has watched the world change, and yet it remains what it has always been, a witness. A quirky detail: modern visitors sometimes tie small ribbons or leave coins at hidden corners of the temple, blending contemporary wishes with ancient tradition. Some believe the wind here carries prayers directly to the heavens, no middleman required. Whether that's true or not, you can't help but whisper a wish yourself, watching it vanish into the night air. The sky above deepens into a river of stars, thick and shimmering, and you realize how small everything else seems from here. Borders, disputes, even centuries of conflict. From this height, the world spreads out like a painting, calm and vast, and the temple feels less like a monument to human ambition and more like a bridge to something beyond understanding. You breathe deeply, letting the cool air settle inside you, and you feel a strange peace, the kind that comes only in places that have endured everything and still remain. You sit down at the cliff's edge, the stones still warm from the day, and watch the last traces of light fade. The temple behind you seems to glow faintly under the stars, as if it absorbs their light and gives it back in whispers. You imagine the priests of old ringing their bells, the soldiers lowering their weapons, the pilgrims kneeling in the dawn, all of them blending into the night's embrace. Time feels soft here, as if it no longer matters, as if only the present moment exists. The wind quiets, the crickets slow their song, and even the stars seem to pulse more slowly. You close your eyes, listening to the silence, feeling the weight of centuries dissolve into calm. The temple, the mountain, and the night cradle you like an ancient lullaby. Preah Vihear is not just a place, it's a memory that never ends, a story that keeps breathing long after the words have faded. And now, as your thoughts grow slower, as your body sinks into the calm, the temple's final gift wraps around you, a deep, abiding stillness, as if the mountain itself whispers, "Rest. I will keep watch." The story softens now like the glow of a candle at the end of a long evening. You are still on the cliff, but the details blur, the edges fade, and only the gentle outline of the temple remains against the night sky. The stars above drift lazily, their light spreading thinly, as if even they are preparing to rest. The wind, once a restless traveler, slows to a steady hum, brushing against your cheek like the hand of an old friend. Everything feels slower, quieter, softer. You take one last breath of the cool mountain air, and with it comes the weight of all you have seen: kings and hermits, battles and prayers, scars and celebrations. The temple's stones hold those memories for you, so you don't have to. You let them go one by one until your thoughts are as still as the carved apsaras dancing forever in the shadows. Their faces seem to smile at you, serene and knowing, as if they've seen countless travelers find peace. Here, and tonight, you are one of them. The mountain beneath you is solid, ancient, reassuring. It has stood for millions of years, and it will stand for millions more long after the noise of human disputes has faded into dust. You are safe here, wrapped in the same stillness that has cradled this temple through every storm. The darkness is no longer heavy. It is soft like a blanket pulled gently over your shoulders. Even the stars seem to dim, giving you space to rest. So you close your eyes, you let the night carry you, the temple watching over you as it always has, patient and kind. And as you drift, the world falls away, leaving only peace, only calm, only sleep.